The world is waking up, and you finding your way here today is no coincidence. The spirit world always has a way of guiding us where we most need to be at the absolute perfect time. I'm your host, Lindsay Morlock, and you're listening to the Guided Podcast, where we explore how the spirit world works on our behalf to guide us along our paths. This is where you'll learn how to live a life that is both conscious and connected, so you can supercharge your pathway to healing and open to life's magic and miracles. Come along this journey to see how guided you truly are. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to this episode of Guided. Today, I am excited to introduce you to Oliviah Shaffer. And Oliviah is a dedicated practitioner of somatic energy work. She weaves together spinal energetics, Usui Holy Fire Reiki, embodiment coaching, and inner child work. Her commitment lies in guiding individuals worldwide as they rediscover their mind, body, soul connection and release tension and trauma that has been stored within their bodies. Oliviah is passionate about revealing the profound impact of suppressed emotions and unresolved trauma on the body. In fact, she draws from her own journey through chronic illness and healing to support her work with others. She intimately understands the challenges of navigating this path alone and is committed to offering compassionate support to others. Oliviah currently resides in upstate New York with her family and sweet dog Ellie. And so, Oliviah, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so happy to be here.
I'm just excited to dive in because you've got so much juicy stuff to share with the audience today. And so, where I love to begin with everyone is, can you share your own awakening story with us? You know, I know we all have these different ways of awakening to our own, divinity or however you want to term it. And so whatever way you're comfortable, share with us a little bit about your own personal journey and your own awakening story.
Yeah, absolutely. So it started when I was really young, but I didn't realize it at the time. I was very connected to nature and energy in particular, just feeling everything very intensely as a child. And of course, that's a lot for a young kid to know to do with. And I feel a lot of people who are in the awakening process now or in the past have a similar story. But yeah, very connected as a kid, and I lost touch with that throughout the years of school and diving into sports and academics more so than the spiritual and creative side of myself. And of course, family plays into that as well, because that's kind of what my siblings enjoyed and my parents as well. So I lost touch with that side. And yeah, I think it was when I started struggling with health issues that the more spiritual side came back as a way to support myself through that time. And yeah, I remember one day, well, I spent many days in bed. I was bedbound for over a year with chronic migraine, and it really changed my entire perspective on life. I started appreciating things more, of course, but also just tapping into the side of myself that I had pushed back for so long, and connecting to energy and the universe and my spirit guides really allowed me to, just open my perspective again to the things in life that are so unseen, but so deeply felt, as I like to say. And so I was laying in bed one day with the migraine, and I'll never forget, my grandmother actually came through, and I was in almost like a trance state. So I wasn't completely asleep, but it definitely felt dreamlike, when the kind of flashes come in of different images and they didn't all make sense. But then she came in, and she had passed a couple years back, and I used to do energy work on her, although I didn't know it was energy work. But when I was a kid, I would channel energy to her to help heal her from dementia. But as a kid, I didn't understand that I wasn't, I maybe was helping her, but I couldn't heal her. And so that was a big journey of understanding just the life and death process and illness. And I think I went on a tangent, but going back to the story. So I had this vision of her come through, and it was her like coming down from really just above, like the universe. And she was carrying a box, and in the box was some form of illness. It said, like, it wasn't words, but it was just the energy around illness, like chronic illness. And she was giving it to me as a gift. And I really think that is when my perspective changed, as like, I'm doomed. Why me? Why do I have to suffer? I'm so different from everybody else. Everyone else my age, they're in college, they're happy and able to just live their life freely. And I was in bed for like days on end. And I think it was then that it kind of opened me up to the perspective of everything happens for a reason and everything's in divine timing. And that really just shifted my perspective in terms of the awakening process and that there's so much more to life than I had been living.
Yeah, so that's a pretty intense journey. I think anytime people are dealing with chronic pain, I would imagine it's so easy to lose sight of any kind of this is happening for a reason, right? Because you're in so much pain. You're not living your life like a normal college kid, right? Because you're bedbound. And so, how do you find that connection to spirit in those moments? Is it like a on your knees praying for relief and for answers, or what did that look like for you?
Yeah, so it was never, surprisingly, it was never like that. I never felt like I needed to pray for relief. I think I was more in the mindset of this is happening for a reason. Please show me the lesson so I can move on. And I think I think I rushed it. I know that one question that you wanted to ask was, what would you advise other people on their spiritual journey? And I think that the main thing is to not search for so many answers because I spent so long searching outside of myself for so many answers, whether it be from other healers, other practitioners, astrology, and I lost so much connection with myself and my own body that it just drove me into a state of dissociation.
Well, I think you're bringing up a really good point here because I think with all of our spiritual journeys, right? I think it's so normal for us to look externally for answers. I just was having a conversation yesterday with a prospective client who called me who has been in chronic pain. And as she talked to me, she was literally downloading, she was in her 70s, and she was literally telling me of a lifetime of trauma that is clearly stored in her body that has now resulted in massive dis-ease within the physical body. Let's just put it that way, right? And you could tell that it was just trauma upon trauma upon trauma that she was talking about that was never able to be released within the body. And so to your point, right, she's been to all of these physicians and blood tests come back normal. And she's like, but I don't feel normal. And so I feel like it's always at that point, this multi-prong approach to healing. And it really starts with us coming back to ourselves and our own heart and being like, what is it that I need right now? Like connecting with the fact that I know that I'm not right. I know my body, I know myself, and I know I'm not right. And so now I need to be the advocate for myself. And how do I need to advocate? Right. And so getting still enough to be able to connect with that. I know for me, I can really resonate with that because when I was in a car accident years ago and I had really bad whiplash after the car accident. And, I was in bed for kind of like 3 days with the neck pain and everything because it was really bad. But then I just kind of went back to the gym and went about my business. And it wasn't until I took a yoga class like 3 months after the accident that forced me to get still enough in that moment. And I remember sitting on the mat with my eyes closed, being like, wow, my neck still really hurts.
Yeah.
And I had been ignoring nerve pain going down my arms. I had been ignoring all sorts of things, but it took that stillness and that quiet within me to be like, oh, I need to address this. This is calling for help. And I'm just keeping myself so busy. I'm just ignoring all of it that I'm allowing it all to go unattended. And so that set me out in search of the medical attention that I needed to be able to bring my body back into balance. But it was 11 years later before I figured out the emotional root behind all of those neck issues. And that was about my spiritual alignment, my emotional alignment, right? And my vibration. And once I figured that piece out, I haven't had any residual neck pain. And so it's kind of crazy how it all works, but you're right. Like we always have to come back to our own hearts and really understand within ourselves, what do I think I need? And sometimes it is a multi-prong approach.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it was a bit opposite for me. And I know a lot of people, I mean, it takes, I just wrote about this actually, but sometimes we'll have those, our body will hit at us like, okay, something's off. Something feels uncomfortable. And then from there, if we don't listen to that, it'll take it to pain and then chronic pain. That's kind of how I see it that's what really happened for me. And I ignored my body and just the signs that I wasn't aligned with my soul. I wasn't aligned with my heart. And I think I was young and didn't understand what that meant. And so I just kind of let it escalate, suppressed it, dove into just more sports, academics, doing more things similar to you and just trying to distract myself myself from it. And it got to the point where it was so bad, the pain was so bad that that's kind of what brought me into the journey rather than the stillness. So it was interesting how sometimes it takes some people, and I have a very strong mind. So I think that's what it took for me. Like I'm being shaken, that type of moment where it's like, okay, wake up. There's so much happening. It's so bad that you can't even function anymore. So let's finally take the leap and dive into this and try to get at the roots of what was causing it.
Yeah, I think both perspectives are so important for people to understand. And I really hope people listening can find themselves on one side of the spectrum or the other. And I identify with what you're saying too. There's definitely been times where I've ignored things to the point where the pain is so bad that you're like, oh, okay, clearly I need to pay attention to this. That might not have been from a place of stillness. But I agree with you. Like at any rate, pain is calling for our attention. It's calling to give us a message because we've ignored or missed an emotional root. And I know that's something that you're particularly interested in and what has guided you to what you now do today. So talk about how this journey inspired you to, move along your path and bring you to the place that you are now.
Yeah, so it was definitely my own journey as well as the journey of many people in my family who do suffer from chronic pain, but realizing the emotional roots and the anxiety and depression, but really just that being completely misaligned with my soul and my heart and what I wanted from life, my purpose, and diving into the what was underneath the pain really just showed me the power of the mind-body connection and how important it is to tend to your emotional health and your spiritual health and not just cover up the symptoms and try to fix the outside, but really try to mend the inside. And I think that journey really inspired me to continue searching for answers. And at first, that led me to go into neuroscience in college, and I wanted to study the brain and how the mind works, so psychology as well, and understanding it from that perspective. But that still felt like something was missing. And it wasn't until I had to leave college for a while for chronic health issues and trying to get myself better. I wasn't able to attend classes anymore, so I was just at the point where I had to leave. So I took some time off and went on this whole journey. Was at a point where I could go back to school. So I went back to school, really felt like I did this whole thing and there's no way I can come out of this and go back to a university like this. So I left there, and that's actually when COVID happened. So then I finished school online, but dove into health and wellness. So more of the herbalism and focusing on your mental and spiritual health and just different practices in the holistic realm that really supported me through my process. And so that was amazing. And I realized that there's no way I can go through life without sharing this with other people just because it's so powerful. And I felt so passionate about the work that I was learning about and that I found so much benefit in. And yeah, that's how I got started. And it kind of all unfolded from there as I found more practices and modalities that supported my health and kind of filled in those gaps of what I felt I was missing in the time. That's really what I dove into. And more of that mind body connection was what I was missing because I felt so disconnected. Even though I was very tapped in spiritually and I was very intuitive and connected, I felt very much disconnected from myself and my body. So that was a whole journey in itself and what led me into the more somatic approaches.
So can we dive into that a little bit? Because I think so many of us are disconnected, right? Like there's so many of us that look to these spiritual modalities to support something within us that feels empty, or we know we can pinpoint that something is missing, something is off. We're not as happy maybe as we feel like we should be. And we know that the mind is the ego mind, right? Is the great separator, right? The ego is what keeps us feeling disconnected. It's what disconnects us from our essence, from our source, right? And so I think we don't talk about that feeling of disconnection enough. And so are you comfortable sharing what that disconnection felt like or looked like for you in your life? Like how did that manifest for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I went on a long journey of connecting to the universe, to energy, to the consciousness. And I missed the part where it's connecting to myself completely. And I think that how it really began is this feeling, the core wound of being different and feeling very connected, but not knowing what to do with that, feeling very different from my family members who were very much in the present. And I was not at all. I was very much in the past, in the future, in different realms and connecting to the unseen. And that really made me feel different. I felt like I didn't belong. I felt like I was dropped dropped on earth and was just told like, okay, figure it out. And it felt very isolating and uncomfortable. And that's when I started diving more into feeling more connected to different, almost like I came from a different planet. That's kind of how it felt. And for a while, I didn't know what to do with that. And it was scary and uncomfortable. And that's what led to the dissociation, feeling like, okay, I'm a soul in a body, but I'm trapped in this body. And what do I do with that? And so I wanted to escape my body for so long and dove into spiritual practices to help make myself feel safe. But I felt so unsafe in here that everything else was just kind of a band-aid for that. And so I connected with, of course, I went on spiritual retreats. That's how I got connected with you. And that was amazing and helped me build that side of myself. But there was still a whole other side that was completely missing from that I didn't realize and was contributing to that disconnect, but also, of course, the pain physically. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at now. I feel like there's a lot more to that story.
Well, and you talk about dissociation a lot, and some people, they know the word, but they don't necessarily know how that manifests itself. So can you dive into that a little bit? Like, what do you mean when you say I was dissociating? Because a lot of us dissociate from our body, right? And so talk a little bit about what that means. And if you can kind of dive into, because I think what you're saying here, right? Like you didn't feel safe in your body. There are so many people that don't feel safe in their body, but they don't know that's what they feel. They just feel fear or they feel, right, something else. And that's oftentimes why we go to our thoughts, because we don't want to stay embodied. So can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think it showed up in many ways for me. For to start, of course, I wanted to escape the pain. So that was one way that I dissociated purposefully, was to disconnect from the pain. So I remember lying in bed for many days with extreme pain, and I didn't want to feel it anymore. So I'd purposefully bring myself into almost a meditative state, but I went deeper than that because I felt completely disconnected from my body. Oftentimes I was seeing myself from above, and it felt more comfortable because I wasn't experiencing the pain, but it felt so scary in a way as well because I was purposefully disconnecting. So that was one way that I felt that disconnection, but other ways too. So sometimes I would feel in that aspect of feeling different. I would feel I didn't belong. I would feel disconnected from my body. My hands didn't look like my own. I would see myself in the mirror, didn't recognize myself, and wondered how, just was in this kind of thought process of how strange it is to be human, to be dropped into this body. And I didn't know what to do with it. I felt so connected to different realms and spirit guides to a point where I felt completely disconnected from my humanity and being so messy and human and feeling emotions in my body. So I think, yes, to get out of the pain, I dissociated purposefully, as well as to not feel emotion, which I didn't know at the time. I feel I disconnected as well. And that's kind of what contributed to searching for answers outside of myself and connecting to the unseen, because I was so uncomfortable in my body. And that looks different for everybody. Some people feel dissociation a little bit differently, but it definitely felt like I wasn't connected to my body. I didn't recognize myself. Sometimes I would go for a walk and I wouldn't know if I was going for a walk or still in my bed with a migraine. And so there was very much fear associated with that as well, because I didn't know where I was, what time I was, everything was out of sorts a lot of times. So
Yeah, it sounds like you're really ungrounded.
absolutely.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's an intense experience, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it was driven by pain. At that time, looking back, I was in so much pain that I feel that level on anyone would drive you to a point of feeling so ungrounded and just up in the clouds sometimes. I wasn't on a lot of medication, so it wasn't any medication doing that. It was really just my mind wanting to escape the amount of pain that I was in. And that's kind of how it manifested, was that disconnection from my body.
Yeah. So in your journey, because there's always an emotional root behind physical pain, right? So in your journey to reconnect with your body and reintegrate the different pieces of yourself to really understand, what are some of the root causes that you were able to identify that were manifesting this pain in your body?
Yeah. So as a child, I was incredibly anxious. Everything made me feel like the world was ending. So whether it be, I remember not wanting to go to sleep at night because I had a friend's father who died in his sleep. And for a long time, I didn't go to sleep because I thought I would die in my sleep. So as a young kid, just things like that really throw you for a loop. And it was scary and I didn't know how to talk about it. And I don't think my parents would have even understood if I did talk about it. And so there was a lot of isolation that I felt because of what I went through, and knowing that everyone else is fine. My siblings were sleeping just fine, but I was staying awake at night because I didn't want to I didn't want to die in my sleep. It was very intense. But I think that a lot of questioning of why I'm here, why we exist as humans to begin with, I was thinking at a very young age. And I know a lot of kids who are very connected have similar stories with that, but it can be very intense as was a young one. I think I was like maybe 5 or 6 years old when I started having those thoughts and curiosities that I didn't have answered, questions that I didn't have answered, and also feeling very connected to energy and just consciousness, and not so much my family and my body was really hard. So I think that also made me feel different, and that's where that core wound came from that I feel played out in many areas of my life and contributed to that disconnection from myself, disconnection from the people around me. And I think over time, experiences kind of piled onto that and created this pain in my body because I wasn't able to identify and help myself move through that. But honestly, at such a young age, I don't know. I feel like it happened exactly how it was supposed to, because I don't know how anyone at that young of an age, even with parents who are supportive, even with a therapist, even with when you're that young, I don't think there's a way to come out of that. I feel like you have to just go through it and then go backwards as an adult and mend and heal those experiences and get to the root of things, because at that young of an age, there's so much coming up, you can't even verbalize it. So yeah, I don't know if you have any experience with that, but I can imagine it's really difficult.
Yeah, I think we all do, right? Like I definitely can relate to the feeling different. Like I've always felt like I was always the wrong age. That's how it manifested for me. Like I remember being in my driveway playing with my next door neighbors, and I want to say we must have been like 10, 11 years old, and I felt like I was playing therapist and like giving them advice. And I remember being like, I feel like an adult right now. Like I don't feel like I am a kid. Like this isn't normal play. It didn't feel like normal play for a kid, for a 10-year-old, And even now, I feel like finally I've kind of caught up where I can maybe act my age. Although my friend will tell me, like, you're the oldest 40-year-old I know, right? Because I do. There are times I act like I'm 80, and I just have always felt this disparity between like the types of things or the type of people that I gravitate to relative to like where my peers are. So I always felt different. I always had this feeling like I don't belong. And one of the things that always kept me kind of pushing through, though, is I have this belief that like, if I don't learn what I need to learn in this lifetime, I'm going to have to come back and do this crap all over again. And I'm not doing that. So, I mean, I know I might have to come back for other reasons, but I don't want to do this journey again, as great as it can be, right? I think we've all experienced our hardships that are like, ooh, like when we're going through things, like things can get dark sometimes. And so I feel like, in hindsight, you always feel stronger and you're more connected to how strong and powerful you really are to be able to move through challenging times. But at the same time, yeah, like we all have these things as kids, right? No matter how wonderful our families, our upbringing, or terrible, right? Like we all are walking around wounded. It's the human condition. And on a spiritual level, I believe it's the perfect setup for what we on a soul level have come into this lifetime having contracted to learn about. So the childhood is the setup, but it can be incredibly challenging to navigate, especially when we're unconscious and we have no idea like why these things are playing out. And I know for me, sometimes it has made me feel like I want to check out of this life. And, there have been times in my own life where I'm like, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to do this. I can't do this, where things have looked so bleak. It's looked so dark that I've had to really dig deep to pull myself out of it. And I think sometimes that's the part of the journey that even myself, like I'm ashamed to talk about because I've been there, I've been to that dark place on more than one occasion. And I'm sure other people have been too. And it's just something that we don't normalize, or we don't talk about those ideations because we feel like it's shameful if we have those thoughts, right? When there's people who don't get to make the choice to stay on the planet, and here we're contemplating taking our own lives sometimes, right? Like but I say that to let people know, like it gets dark, things get heavy sometimes, and sometimes it feels like it would just be easier to check out. And in hindsight, I can say that wasn't going to help. I was just going to have to come back and do this all over again, right? And so I'm not trying to make light of a very heavy topic, but humor is one of my coping mechanisms and how I navigate, some of the harder times in my own life. So I went on a tangent there, but I don't know if you can relate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the healing journey, that's a phrase that's used a lot. And I think there's this idea that it's all positive and we're growing and everything's getting better. But it takes going through some really dark times to get to a point where you're feeling more in control of your life, feeling more aligned with yourself. I don't think that, and I was just talking about this the other day, is a lot can come from having allowing positive experiences and joy and peace and exploring yourself and different aspects that maybe you suppress for different reasons. But a lot also comes from pain and learning how to navigate that in a way that's supportive to you. And I definitely felt similar for a while. And actually, the pain is what helped me, the chronic pain of migraine and different symptoms that I was having. That in itself brought me to a place where I wanted to check out as well. I didn't want to feel anymore. Of course, I didn't want to be in pain. Then on top of that, I went through this whole journey with depression and not knowing why I was here and why was I here to just sit in bed and be in pain all day. That was kind of the thought process that I was in. And then with the dissociation of feeling disconnected, everything was really just, the energy felt very swirly, very ungrounded, very disconnected. And I felt like maybe I was dropped down on the wrong planet. Maybe I came at the wrong time, didn't feel like I'm supposed to be here at all. And it wasn't even, I was so at peace with that for a while too, just feeling like everyone's sad that I have these thoughts that I don't want to be alive anymore. However, it felt so peaceful to me because I really truly thought that I wasn't supposed to be here, given the amount of pain I was in, given the disconnection I felt from my body, given how disconnected I felt from my friends and my family. And I also felt very similar as a kid. I wouldn't ever really be playing with my friends at a birthday party. I would be talking to the parents. And so I felt like maybe I was dropped down here at the wrong time. Like there was an error somewhere. And for a while, I felt so much peace with that. Like I was just ready. And no one understood that because usually it comes from it was a dark place, but there's not much peace around that usually. Not much peace with the decision, at least on the outside. And so I think being in so much pain led me to a place where I remember being in an infusion chair, which I have severe anxiety, even going back to that place. But I had to get infusions for a while, a lot of different medications just to manage the pain. And I would be sitting in a chair for 8 hours at a time and getting an infusion. And during that time, I was in a meditative state, but it felt very much out of body. And that disconnection felt very scary. And it was impending doom, fear of dying. And from that experience, I realized, okay, maybe I'm not supposed to die, because if I were to be in this much fear, I wouldn't want to get out of it.
Right. It was like a catalyst to the contrast of oh, I actually want to live.
Right, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I realized that, okay, if I really wasn't supposed to be here, I wouldn't be in this much fear during these experiences where I would go in and fear dying. I didn't understand how one day I could be like, okay, I'm not supposed to be here. Everything's going to be okay because I was just dropped down at the wrong time. And then I would go in to have these experiences getting infusions where I would be so afraid of death because it felt like I was dying. I was in a chair. I was very young, getting infusions and in incredible pain. My mom had to be my caretaker. Couldn't shower standing up. Couldn't walk down the stairs by myself. Couldn't go outside really. And the times I didn't know where I was, if I was inside or still in the bed. So it was a mess at that time. But yeah, I think everything kind of led me to where I was supposed to be. And those two opposite experiences of feeling scared of death and then also wanting it to escape the pain, that contrast was confusing as well. So learning what to do with that was confusing. And I think seeking out support from coaches and different people who have been through it, like yourself, really helped me to get through that as well.
Yeah. And I think, that's the message I want to impart on people. I think there's a few things, right? Because we're talking here about suicidal ideation. So let me just name it right. You and I have had many offline conversations about our own and how they played out. And so I remember years ago, my own therapist saying to me, the ideations are normal. So we can normalize having these thoughts. Cause I think sometimes when we talk about these things, people don't talk about their ideations because they think they're going to be committed automatically or something's going to happen and there's going to be, a health and safety check or a halt. And that's not necessarily the case, right? So what she said was the ideations themselves are normal. Acting on them is not. And it's an important distinction because I remember for me, something that helped me with my own ideations was the more I learned about the games of my ego. And, my ego would tell me to kill myself before it would tell me to just find a new job. Think about how crazy that is, right? It felt less scary to the ego to die than to make a change. And I think that's what happens, right? That's when we're disconnected from our essence. This is literally what the ego rolls out on us. It's like, I just want to take the easy way out. Let's just check out. Let's just be done, right? Because I don't want to have to face the pain that's going to be associated with a change that feels way scarier for some reason than checking out of this lifetime, right? But I think one of the most important things for me and my healing with this was being able to have enough pause, enough separation to be like, oh, okay, I have this thought about wanting to check out and I don't have to listen to it. Like, we are not our thoughts. We have thoughts. We are not our thoughts. We have bodies. We are not our bodies. Right. And so I think that's such an important thing for people to remember. Like, your ego mind, when we are disconnected from our true essence, like depression, quite literally, is like the greatest disconnection we can have from our soul, right? Like, that is the place that we are in. We are in that depth of disconnection when we are feeling depressed. And so what that is calling for is for us to reconnect with our soul, right? With our spirit, with our high self, in order to feel that reconnection. And so I want to give people hope as a result of talking about this. Like, there is absolutely a way out of this. So please, please, please ask for help, because I think that because there is so much shame, or this is such a taboo topic, people don't ask for help because they feel like they're going to be judged. I know I felt that way. You know what I mean? And so we hide that we're not okay, right? And some of us, have those people that know us well enough to know that we're not okay, and right, and help us come out of it. But I think, like, we don't have to go through this alone. We don't have to suffer in silence and having these thoughts. So hopefully this conversation helps normalize for people that it's not that people aren't having these thoughts. It's that we're not talking about the fact that we have these thoughts because we feel like there's something wrong with us, or that we're going to be judged. And I think that the more we can open up the conversation for people, I hope it just inspires people to ask for help, because I have been at the lowest of lows and really not being able to see the light at the end of the tunnel, right? Like, not at all being able to see how I was going to come out and through the other side of it. And here I am feeling good and happy. And I had to fight for that, right? I had to fight my ego off to get back to that place of peace within myself. But I also feel like, being able to understand the depth of depression and the depths of despair, it also somehow increases your capacity to experience joy.
Yeah. Yeah, totally agree. And I think you're exactly right that it is fighting off our ego and those thoughts they feel like they're us, but they're not. And feeling that separation from ourselves, from our thoughts, I should say, is what really allows for that pause to go get help, or realize, okay, that really wasn't right. That thought really was uncomfortable. Let's seek out some support, because I can't handle this on my own, and it's totally okay. And like you said, more people experience this than they talk about. And that's what also makes everyone feel like they have to hide. Not everyone, but most people feel some shame around the topic. And it's something that, unfortunately, more people than not experience at this point. And yeah, I know that you said as well that it allows us more capacity to hold space for the joy. And I think it helps with appreciation and just gratitude for what is, and knowing too how dark it can get, and being able to relate to people in that way and help them navigate those times in their life has been really helpful for me, because most of the people that I talk to actually have experienced very similar things in their life where they felt at their rock bottom and didn't know how to come out of that. And maybe they're in that right now and are seeking support, which is incredible. And being able to relate on that level is really helpful as well. And it's not something that feels anymore so dark and doom ridden. It really feels like there is hope, and it takes someone else sometimes to come in and remind you that even though you can't see it, it's still there, and one day you'll get to that point. And I'm incredibly grateful to have had those people in my life to do that for me, and I'm honored to be able to do that for others right now.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I think we have some interesting opposite experiences in some regards, right? You were dealing with physical and emotional pain that brought you to the depth of the despair. And mine wasn't physical, it was mostly emotional, right? That I wanted to get out of. And so no matter where people are at, no matter what you're feeling, if you're having those thoughts, like, speak up, because shame wants to hide. Like, it wants us to keep it in. It wants us to not expose it, but everything feels lighter when we bring light to that darkness. And sometimes that light is as simple as just saying to somebody, I'm not okay. Like, can you please just listen? Can you please help me? So we'll include some resources too for people in the show notes. So if anybody's struggling with this, they can get help. But I'm so grateful that you opened up about that as well, because I do want to start normalizing this conversation for people, that, like, people have these thoughts. Acting on them is a different story. And we want to help people before it gets to that point. But I just see so many people, especially young people right now, like checking out, and making that decision. And it's happening in different ways. And that tells me there's a lot of emotional pain that's not being addressed, not to mention physical pain, but like a lot of emotional pain that is not being addressed that we need to change. So I hope this will encourage people to speak up and speak out about what they're going through. With that in mind, I know spinal energetics is a big part of your life today. And I know that was a huge catalyst for you to feel reconnected to yourself and your body. So can you talk a little bit about how you were led into that body of work and how that's helped you feel safe in your body again?
Yeah, so I came across spinal energetics on social media actually a few years back in the beginning stages of it being founded. It's a newer practice, so I think it's been around maybe 6 years at this point, I believe. And I found it on social media. I came across a woman who I really related to, and she just felt very safe and warm, and she was promoting herself on social media. And so I didn't really know what to expect, honestly. I booked a session with her, and it was beyond anything I had ever expected to come out of something, especially on a virtual format. So through Zoom, it was because she's in Australia. Obviously, I'm in New York, so it's a bit of a drive to get there, even a flight. But yeah, it really helped me to connect to my body in that I was still accessing a meditative state. I was still, moving into those alpha and theta waves, getting really close to my soul, but also my body. So spinal energetics is working with the spine, the nervous system, and the energetic field to help unwind tension and trauma that we've stored in our body. And through working with Eastern and Western philosophies, so we work with the chakras and the layers of consciousness, as well as the spine and different areas of our body that we tend to hold tension. And the merging of the two, the merging of the spiritual and energetic and the physical, and how the body changes posture, how the body goes into those state of protection and survival, really helped me to notice my body more and where I was holding tension and why I was holding tension there, and learning how to move through emotions somatically through my body, actually feeling them rather than intellectualizing, which I know we both talk about a lot, but how important it is to sit with feelings rather than just think about them and rationalize and try to analyze and connect the dots, which can really contribute to those thought spirals. And it really changed my life and opened doors to a lot more learning that I had to do in regards to the mind body connection and really feeling instead of thinking through emotions. And yeah, I think it was kind of the seed that started the rest, that grew the rest of my knowledge for myself. I would say really, I don't know if self-development is the word for it, because I know that's thrown around a lot, but it felt really just getting to know myself on a much deeper level than I had known before, connecting to my body in ways that I never had done before, in ways that I would try to escape. I learned to sit with it and feel it and let it kind of move through my body. Of course, emotions don't last as long as we think they will. I think it's often that we think feeling our emotions is going to make us get stuck in it. And that's actually the opposite of what happens. And it took a lot of coaching and meeting with different practitioners, different modalities to realize that. But ultimately, spinal energetics kind of filled in the gap that was there between the void of spiritual side and energy and the physical. I didn't know how to merge that. And spinal energetics for me was that connection between the two.
Yeah. And I always like to reiterate to people, I talk about feeling your feelings a lot on this podcast. And what I like to reiterate to people is feeling your feelings is literally locating physical sensation in the physical body and noticing that, feeling the sensation, and then allowing that to release. What we are conditioned to do essentially in society is think our feelings. So if you are thinking about all of the reasons that you're angry, if you're thinking about all the reasons you're mad or sad or fill in the blank, you're thinking your feelings. You're not feeling them. And thinking our emotions is one of the number one ways we avoid feeling and processing them in the body. And so I love that spinal energetics was one of the ways that helped you really connect back into your body to understand, right, how to feel and release those sensations. Because especially from a physical perspective and physical or chronic pain, I really believe that our issues are stuck in our tissues. And I think that's my understanding is one of the things that spinal energetics can really help with. It's like releasing this trauma and pain that gets locked and trapped in the body. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think also a lot of what I've went into after spinal energetics is the reasons why our body is the way our body holds the pain and maybe even the posture that we're in. And I think even knowing and having that knowledge of why our body is, for example, tensing our jaw. I recently learned, and I feel crazy saying this just because it feels so much like common sense, but the reason we tense our jaw is not just because, okay, I thought we're stressed, so everything's tense, but the reason we tense our jaw is when we're in a state of fight or flight, we're worried about, or our body is preparing for actual danger. And if we were to get hit in the mouth, and if we somehow were to have our jaw dislocated and we weren't able to chew, we would die if we didn't have the ability to eat and masticate our food. So the reason our jaw tenses is to protect us from losing the ability to chew and thus survive. So learning different things of why, different reasons behind why is my body tense? Why is my shoulders up to my ears? What is this doing? And how is this serving to protect me, help me to develop a different relationship with my body. And rather than seeing it as, okay, I'm so tense, trauma's manifesting as pain, my body's out to punish me, it's really our body's in a state of protection. And moving into that perspective, shifting out of the punishment and feeling that I don't want to be in this body because of all the pain it brings to me, and really shifting that into, okay, but it's really just protecting me from the emotions that I'm experiencing and the way my brain is perceiving my current reality really helped me to mend my relationship with my body.
Yeah. And I think it's so beautiful because what you've illustrated, right, is that like you can heal. I think it's so beautiful to understand, like, whether we're talking about physical pain, whether we're talking about emotional pain, spiritual, like, we have the ability to change everything in our life if we're willing to look within and really understand what the messages that we're getting are trying to tell us and trying to teach us. I mean, you were in such great levels of pain from such a young age in your life, moving all the way through to your journey now. Like, what a 360, right? Like, you are a completely different person and still learning and still growing and still evolving, right? And so I think it's powerful to realize that we have the ability to influence all of this if we're willing to look into it and understand, like, what are the messages that it's trying to give us? What are the imbalances that have manifested within the body, and what emotionally has been imbalanced that's calling for our attention, that this pain is so screaming at us at this particular juncture, right?
Yeah, and I think often we think that the symptoms are the problem, but they're really just those little messengers that are telling us what needs tended to and where we're not free in our body, mind, and soul. And yeah, I think just realizing that is a whole different perspective and can really help to just cultivate that more positive relationship with our bodies and also our mind, and the ways in which maybe depression shows up or anxiety shows up, but that's not the problem. The problem is underneath. Often it's experiences that we have had as children, inner child wounds, trauma, things that we haven't worked through or processed. And now we're showing up with maybe anxiety or depressive symptoms. So everything has a root, and getting to the root of what's underneath the physical symptoms and the emotional symptoms is, I think, the key.
Yeah. And I feel like, you're talking too on another level, the things that you're sharing is really speaking to the different ways that you've been guided by your own spiritual support teams, by the universe, source, whatever you want to call it, to develop awareness around these things. And so I always love to understand from my guests, like, how do you, connect with spirit or source or the universe? Like, what are the different ways that you feel guided in your own life? How does that play out for you?
Yeah, so I'm very connected to my intuition, I would say, as well as feeling like there's something over me, whether it's universe, source energy. I know there's a lot of names for it, but I feel like I'm being guided from a higher place. I feel like I'm supported, even though there might not be people around me. I'm always supported by spirit guides, whether it be past relatives that have passed over that feel like they're very much still a part of my life. I feel that helps me to move through my journey and feel like there's another power that's helping me navigate the situations that I'm experiencing in life, and also really listening to my body, of course, as well. So those nudges that help that, for example, if there's pressure on my chest or if there's a feeling and pit in my stomach, I now know that those are indicators to move in a certain direction. And yeah, I mean, I do pull cards. I'm very much into oracle cards, and sometimes we'll use a pendulum depending on how I'm feeling that day. Sometimes, sometimes I feel more connected to the spiritual side than others. However, I think that ultimately feeling like I'm supported beyond the people on this earth plane helps me to navigate situations with more ease, clarity, and just feeling like I'm never alone.
And how do you feel like your own spiritual gifts like have evolved along this journey? I mean, were you just always into all of that stuff? And like I know from a young age you were connected and you had that experience with your grandmother, so that was pretty powerful. But have you seen your own intuitive gifts evolve? And if so, how so?
Yeah, absolutely. So for a while, I suppressed it as a teenager, not understanding, feeling like I was making everything up, not knowing if I was going to be seen in a certain way or kind of rejected if I expressed these feelings, and feeling more connected and having visions and feeling like I'm getting messages from spirit. And I didn't know what to do with that as when I was younger, but now I feel it comes through pretty much every single time I'm either meditating throughout the day. It comes through as well as working with clients. So definitely I have different images of the past, the present, and the future, which is wild sometimes. And it doesn't always make sense to me in the moment, but sometimes even that validation of sharing that with the person I'm working with and having that be reflected in those kind of like, oh, okay, those moments where it's like, how did you know that? But yeah, I definitely feel very intuitive, very connected to spirit. And I know there's like the clairvoyance. I feel like I'm a little bit of everything, clairsentient, clairvoyant, clairaudient. Everything kind of comes through. And I feel like practicing that, allowing it to be, and knowing that it's safe to lean into that side of myself. It's not something that I have to be ashamed about anymore, is really helpful of just opening those doors to what's possible as far as that connection. And so it's definitely grown. I think it's really grown because I've taken off those layers of reasons why I have to suppress that side of myself and just open the doors to the possibility.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Thank
So,
you.
how do you see magic and miracles playing out in your own life? I mean, a lot of what you've talked about is pretty magical. Your whole healing journey is pretty magical, right? That you've been able to heal yourself and restore pretty vibrant health, at least from my perspective. But maybe it's that, but maybe it's something else. How do you see these magic and miracles playing out for you?
Yeah, I think sometimes it does feel like magic when those intuitive messages come through or the guidance comes through that feels it's spot on, and I don't know where it came from, but it's makes sense. And I think that feels like magic sometimes, as well as my whole journey and being in such a dark place and bringing myself out of that and now being in a place to support others through that. That definitely feels like a miracle in itself. So I feel every day different signs come up that feel like they're a bit magical, but overall I feel like maybe life in general is just magic. There's
Yeah.
a lot of things that don't always make sense and are just, and so it is type of
Yeah.
experiences.
Yeah, I
So
got a breath of truth when you said just like, navigating and like you're still here and navigating the journey and that being a miracle. I got a huge breath of truth on that one. So, yes to that for sure. And there is so much magic in this life, and if we just connect to it and we start looking at the different synchronicities, right? We connect more into the magic and the miracles. So, in wrapping all of this up, Olivia, what advice would you have for anybody who's just starting out on their spiritual journey?
yeah, I think it's so important to connect with yourself first and then seek answers. That's something that I kind of did a little bit backwards and wish that maybe it could have been different, but I know everything happened the way it was supposed to. But I think really connecting with yourself and finding those answers, getting in touch with your own intuition and your body, and really navigating that relationship with yourself before you seek answers outside is helpful. So whether that be journaling or meditating or really just connecting with your body, whether it's any type of self-expression, so dance or singing, and anything that allows you to connect with who you are at your core before you seek guidance from other people might be really helpful, as well as just remembering that you have the answers inside of you, and that doesn't mean that you shouldn't get support. So often I thought in my journey that phrase, you have everything inside of you, you don't need, meant that I didn't need other people as well. And so that also kept me isolated. So I definitely recommend to find other people, but also know that the answers that you have inside of you are most important, and to listen to those always first.
Yeah. And it's like when you're even looking for a practitioner, like run that through your guidance system, like sit with that. Like, does this feel right? Does it feel good to go to this person or does it not? Right. Like, I think that's so important running, even when we do go outside of ourselves ourselves for answers because we do need help sometimes. Like we want to run everything through our internal guidance system. Even when someone gives us a piece of advice, right? We might resonate with some of it, not resonate with some of it. So run everything through your own guidance system because nobody's guidance for you is better than your own guidance for you. So that's such great advice. So Olivia, how can my listeners support you?
Yeah, so I am active on social media. My Instagram is soothe_wellness. So definitely on social media, but also just learning about yourself and helping yourself to move through the things that are holding you back, healing this whole journey, I feel helps the collective and in turn helps me. So really just doing the work and finding the truth in who you are, remembering who you are at your core. That's the most important thing.
Beautiful. Well, we will include all of your information in the show notes for our listeners. And thank you so much for being here today and for being willing to be so vulnerable with some of your experiences and talking about some really deep stuff that can be really hard to share. I have no doubt that people will be grateful and benefit from, being able to hear your story and also hopefully feel witnessed in that as well. So thank you all, and I will see you all next time. Thank you so much for listening to the Guided Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I would be so grateful if you would share it with a friend or even leave me a review so we can ensure that it makes its way into the ears of listeners who need to hear these messages most. Until next time, may you remember how guided you truly are.